The ballroom glowed beneath enormous crystal chandeliers, while rain traced silver lines down the glass walls of the Ashford Tower overlooking Manhattan. Soft piano music drifted through the room, barely louder than the quiet laughter of wealthy strangers pretending to enjoy one another. Waiters moved carefully between clusters of executives carrying champagne on silver trays, while conversations rose and fell in polished rhythms around the people who mattered most. Near the far edge of the ballroom, beside the tall windows facing the city skyline, stood a woman in a dark navy dress holding a glass of sparkling water with both hands. She had been standing there for almost 40 minutes. People looked at her, then through her, then away again. No one ignored her openly. In rooms like this, cruelty was always more refined than that. Her name was Claire Bennett, 35 years old, formerly married to one of the firm's senior investment directors until a difficult divorce 6 months earlier quietly changed the temperature of every room she entered. Before the divorce, invitations arrived early. Conversations lasted longer, people remembered her birthday. Now the same women who once hugged her at charity galas suddenly became distracted when she approached. The same men who once praised her intelligence now nodded politely before turning towards someone more useful. Claire understood exactly what was happening around her tonight. That was the hardest part. Nothing was loud enough to defend yourself against. Across the ballroom, Ethan Cole stood near the orchestra platform with one hand resting loosely around a glass of whiskey he had barely touched. At 39, Ethan had spent nearly a decade building Cole 2H Marrow Financial into one of the most respected firms in the city. He was wealthy enough that people lowered their voices when he entered rooms, though he rarely used the attention. Quiet by nature, Ethan had mastered the art of observing without appearing to. Tonight he had watched the entire ballroom rearrange itself around Claire like water around stone. A senior partner's wife glanced toward Claire, whispered something behind her champagne glass, and smiled. 2 younger associates deliberately chose another path rather than walk near her. None of it would sound cruel if repeated later. That was what made it cruel. Ethan continued watching for another minute before finally setting his drink onto a passing tray. Beside him, a colleague named Richard noticed the movement immediately. "Where are you going?" Ethan adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit calmly. Across the room, Richard followed his gaze toward Claire and exhaled softly. Ethan looked at him once. "What?" Richard lowered his voice. "You know how people are talking." Ethan's expression barely changed. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's part of the problem." Then he began walking. The shift in the ballroom happened almost instantly. Conversations softened one by one as people noticed where Ethan Cole was going. Claire sensed it too before she even looked up. When she finally noticed Ethan approaching, her posture straightened slightly, not with excitement, but caution. Powerful men rarely crossed rooms like this without a reason. Ethan stopped a respectful distance away. "You look cold," he said softly. Claire blinked once in surprise. "I'm fine." Ethan glanced briefly toward the ballroom around them. "You don't seem fine." For a moment she studied his face carefully, searching for the usual signs: pity, performance, curiosity. She found none, only steadiness. "Mr. Cole," she said politely. "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Claire." Around them, the ballroom had already begun listening without pretending not to. Claire noticed immediately. "Half this room is staring at us right now," she murmured. Ethan looked once across the chandeliers and polished marble floor before returning his attention to her. "That sounds exhausting for them." Against her own expectations, the corner of Claire's mouth moved slightly. Almost a smile. Ethan noticed because he noticed everything. "Would you like to dance?" he asked calmly. Claire stared at him for a second. That would be a terrible idea, probably. "You understand what people will say tomorrow." Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket. "People always need something to talk about. And this doesn't bother you?" Ethan's expression darkened faintly with old memory. Not as much as pretending not to see someone standing alone. Silence settled briefly between them, while nearby conversations weakened into whispers. Claire looked down at the sparkling water in her hands. "You shouldn't do this because you feel sorry for me." Ethan answered immediately, "I don't." She looked back up at him carefully. "Then why?" Ethan glanced toward the rain sliding down the glass skyline outside before answering quietly. "Because 5 years ago, after my company collapsed, I spent an entire year walking into rooms where people suddenly forgot how to look me in the eye." Claire's expression changed slightly. Ethan continued in the same calm tone. I remember exactly what that feels like. The orchestra shifted into a slower piano arrangement beneath the chandeliers overhead. Ethan extended his hand toward her, not dramatically, simply waiting. Around them, the ballroom watched openly now. Claire understood that the moment she took his hand, the room would become louder tomorrow morning. She also understood something else. Ethan already knew that too. Slowly, she placed her glass onto a passing tray and rested her hand in his. Warm, slightly trembling, together they stepped onto the dance floor beneath the soft golden light. Conversations nearly disappeared completely around them. Ethan guided her gently, one hand resting respectfully at her waist while the orchestra played a slow waltz. "They're staring," Claire whispered after several moments. "Yes. You seem unusually calm about it." Ethan's voice remained even. "I spent too many years letting fear decide what kind of man I was going to be." Claire looked up at him then properly for the first time. His eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had survived things without speaking about them often. "Before my divorce," she said softly, "I used to belong in rooms like this." Ethan nodded once. "And now?" Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. "Now I'm the cautionary tale standing near the wall." Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "No," he said quietly. "You're a person standing in a room full of people more concerned with appearances than honesty." The words settled between them heavier than the music. Across the ballroom, senior executives watched carefully. One woman looked openly irritated now. Another pretended not to notice while clearly listening to every word nearby. Ethan ignored all of it. Claire could feel the difference. For the first time all evening, she no longer felt invisible. Then the interruption arrived. Daniel Mercer, one of the firm's senior directors, approached the edge of the dance floor, wearing the controlled expression of a man attempting diplomacy. "Ethan," he said carefully, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Ethan slowed slightly but did not step away from Claire. "You can speak here." Daniel glanced briefly toward Claire before lowering his voice. "You're creating unnecessary attention." Ethan looked around the ballroom thoughtfully. "Interesting," he replied calmly. "I was just thinking the unnecessary part was watching an entire room pretend someone stopped existing because her marriage ended." The silence afterward spread immediately. Daniel's expression tightened. "That's unfair." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "No," he said softly. "What happened to her was unfair." Nobody nearby moved. Claire stared at Ethan with visible disbelief because powerful people almost never risk reputation for someone socially inconvenient. Daniel finally exhaled slowly. "Enjoy your evening," he said flatly. "I intend to," Ethan answered. Daniel walked away beneath the chandeliers while the orchestra continued playing softly around them. Claire looked down for a moment before speaking again. "You really don't care what happens after tonight?" Ethan's expression softened slightly. "That's not true," he said. "I care very much." His eyes moved across the ballroom one slow time. "I'm simply tired of caring about the wrong things." Claire was quiet after that. They continued dancing while rain drifted down the glass skyline outside and the room slowly adjusted around them. Something had changed now. Not completely, but enough. Two younger associates smiled politely toward Claire as they passed. A woman who ignored her earlier finally nodded hello. Small things, but meaningful, because exclusion survives through silence, and silence had finally broken. When the song ended, Ethan released her gently, though neither stepped away immediately. "Do you know what hurts most about being ignored?" Claire asked quietly. Ethan shook his head once. "It's how normal everyone makes it feel." Ethan understood instantly because he had once carried the same feeling himself. "Most people," he said softly, "would rather protect comfort than risk honesty." Claire studied him silently beneath the chandelier light. "And you?" Ethan glanced briefly toward the ballroom around them. "Tonight," he answered quietly, "I decided comfort was becoming too expensive." Nearly an hour later, they left the gala together beneath the glowing entrance of the Ashford Tower, while black luxury cars waited along the rain-covered street outside. Cold autumn wind moved through the city carrying the sound of distant traffic. Ethan walked beside Claire calmly, matching her pace without crowding her. At the curb, she turned toward him beneath the gold hotel lights. "Tomorrow morning, this entire city will invent stories about tonight," she said softly. Ethan adjusted his coat against the cold. "Cities always do." Claire looked at him for several long seconds before asking the question still lingering between them. "Why did you really walk across the room tonight?" Ethan watched the rain sliding down the windows of the waiting cars before answering. "Because I know what it feels like when a room decides silence is easier than kindness." Claire's guarded expression softened completely then. Not dramatically, honestly. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Claire." She entered the waiting car while Ethan remained standing beneath the rain-lit skyline, watching it disappear into late-night traffic. Above him, crystal chandeliers still glowed through the ballroom windows where polished conversations continued exactly as before. But something inside that room had changed. Because sometimes courage is not loud. Sometimes it is simply the quiet decision to stand beside someone everyone else has chosen not to see.